Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Ernesto and Rez, your host, CEO and co-founder of Mayan, YC Winter 21. We're a growth automation platform for Amazon sellers. What that means is that we leverage data-driven automations and machine learning technology to optimize advertising on behalf of our Amazon customers and expanding into other territories soon beyond that. But today, we're here to talk about product-led growth, and I have the awesome Rez Khan with us. Rez is the co-founder of Pace. He has deep expertise in product management and PLG strategies from his background in Mongo, where he spent about 3.5 years. It's my pleasure to welcome him, and I'll let him give himself a deeper dive into his background, and then we'll hop right into it. So Rez, welcome.
Hey, everyone. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Hey, nice to meet everyone. Thanks for the awesome intro, Ernesto. Like you mentioned, I'm the co-founder of a company called Pace. We're a New York-based enterprise software company, and we're hoping to be the missing link between product-led growth and your classic sales-led growth motion. Prior to Pace, I worked at MongoDB for a number of years. I was one of the first product managers for their cloud product called Atlas, which is basically MongoDB as a service on the cloud. And we followed a very classic product-led growth model with a generous free tier converting into paid tier, and subsequently a top-down sales motion once a customer becomes large enough. Did a whole lot of work in growing that business from 10 million to approximately $500 million in revenue in a very short amount of time. And some of the lessons I had learned working at one of the most successful product-led growth developer companies. We're trying to operationalize that in our company and hoping to share that with the wider community.
Awesome. That's great growth that you were helping deliver there at Mongo. And yeah, let's hop into it. Let's see what product-led growth is. So to start, Rez, could you help define what PLG is, or what is product-led growth?
Yeah, it's actually a very difficult question because there's probably 50 different definitions of product-led growth in the market, and more and more every day I'm seeing different VCs try to be thought leaders of product-led growth and come up with their own definition. In my mind, it's pretty simple. It's about how do you create a experience for your customers such that they can learn about what you do very quickly and use the product for a real life use case without any restrictions. And restrictions could mean things like they don't need to talk to sales to get a demo, or they don't need to talk to a solutions engineer to implement the product. They can log in by themselves with whatever email address they prefer, learn what the product does, use it for a real life use case to truly understand the value of what the product does. While for probably many YC companies, that might seem very obvious, but in the world of enterprise software, it's actually fairly new. There were forward-looking companies like Slack and Zoom and Dropbox, which did that. But the vast majority of enterprise software companies are very traditional sales-led, which means you need to go through a lot of hoops to even understand the value of the product and whether it makes sense for you. Product-led growth kind of turns it on its head because you're just giving the product away for free and hoping everyone can learn it by themselves. And we can obviously dig much deeper into what that tactically means.
Got it. Thank you. And super quick to the audience, if there's any questions that come up during the conversation, please feel free to drop them off. We'll address some as they come up, and then we'll also have some time available after for Q&A where you can speak directly with Rez. So we kind of touched a little bit on this, but could you dive deeper into what are some of the most common misconceptions about PLG or PLG strategies?
Yeah, I mean there's a ton, obviously, and one of the things that I frequently see other founders or even large enterprises who talk to us about whether they should do PLG is understanding even when PLG makes sense for your company and your product and your market, and oftentimes it does not. And we can obviously dig very deep into what are the type of products and markets where PLG makes sense and what are the type of products and markets where it doesn't. But beyond that, some of the common misconceptions I hear or I see about PLG are things like Oftentimes people think PLG is basically a free product. That is partially true. The point of PLG is like not to give a free product away, but to give just enough for a customer to understand and use the product for a real life use case, and then gate it beyond a paywall. And what the paywall is can be very, very different things. A very common misconception is the paywall is just the number of days you can use a particular product. That might not be the case. The paywall could be the number of features you can use before you jump into a paid plan. Or it could be the number of resources you're consuming, and the resources may be measured in terms of seats, or in the case of like a database product, like at Mongo, it was around the amount of data you're storing inside Mongo. And what you select as free, what is free in the PLG product, what is not free, also requires like a very careful thought. And there are a bunch of like frameworks and techniques you can use to like figure that out. And beyond that, like the other interesting thing that I see is oftentimes people don't really think about who the right customers are before they go PLG. They feel that as if, I'm going to make a self-service product, which is free to use. I'm going to throw a bunch of like marketing dollars behind it, and hopefully like, customers will come. And that can be very, very dangerous, because oftentimes you might have the wrong customers coming into using your PLG product, and that might give you the wrong signals as to like, what you should be building. So going PLG doesn't mean you abdicate, like, defining who your ideal customer or ICP is, and having very careful like marketing strategies to get those type of customers so that you're learning the right things.
Got it. Awesome. Yeah, I want to dive deeper into some of the topics you brought up there. First, is PLG for every type of company in the industry, or are there better products, better companies that are better suited for PLG? And then what stage should companies start thinking about PLG? Is it, hey, before product market fit as a way to try to get PMF faster? Is it post product market fit so that you have your ideal ICP profile well defined, and now it's just trying to accelerate that? How have you seen where kind of it's best implemented, both in terms of companies and stage of the business?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, and I'll start with a pretty controversial one, which is also like an easy one for I guess like a lot of people here to grok. Sometimes when you want to go PLG depends on your fundraising stage. So one of the things that I'm seeing over the past, maybe like 6 months, as the fundraising climate became like more constricted, companies who did PLG and weren't able to quickly show like traction, oftentimes like VCs like look at that and can write off that particular company and say like, oh, the market isn't real, the market doesn't like exist, etc. So I'm not going to blame the VCs obviously, but getting PLG right takes a long time. And if you don't have that much time before you raise the next round of fundraising, like whether it's like a seed or a Series A, trying out PLG and failing could be detrimental to like your fundraising effort. So I have several friends who were tackling like a really interesting problem. They went like PLG like 6 months or a year before they were raising money, and they couldn't exactly crack the PLG motion, which is totally fine because it takes a long time to do it. But the investors were using that as reasons to not invest in that particular company. Well, they should, we can argue like they should have a longer view on things and all that stuff, but the reality of the market is so sometimes it's better to, in the early stages, it's better to not go PLG, prove that the product works for your initial well-defined ICPs, and then go to the market saying, hey, we have this plan to go PLG, we just need money to do it. So that's it's maybe a controversial opinion, but that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Less controversial is you could cut the problem of whether you should go PLG into maybe a couple of buckets. The first bucket is what the market is, and the second bucket is whether this particular solution that you're selling or problem that you're solving can be solved via PLG. So let's look at the market first. Again, it's like a little bit easier. PLG kind of makes sense more if the market is very, very massive and there's a long tail of customers. So for database products like MongoDB, it made a ton of sense because there's a long tail of developers like in a building application. But if I'm building, let's say, a product which only car manufacturers can use, yeah, it makes no sense to like do PLG. Do your classic like sales-led growth motion. Hire someone in sales who's well connected in those industries, etc. So think very carefully about like, is this a very large market? Is there like a long tail? What is the average order size of solutions people purchase in that market? And then decide like whether PLG makes sense or not. The more harder question is like what kind of product and solution like PLG makes sense for. Now, one of the key things with PLG is the point is to provide an experience where an end user can quickly understand the value of the product. And there are some cases where that might not be possible. That onboarding is actually more difficult than for just an end user to like do it by themselves. A classic example would be a product which requires multiple stakeholders in a company to closely coordinate to use. So data products sometimes can fall in that bucket where, let's say this data product is for a particular non-data persona in a company, but they need the data persona in the company to enable this product. It's a little bit like harder to do like PLG well. So in other words, like when you have a product where an end user by themselves can quickly understand the value without involving other people, like it makes a ton of sense for PLG to be a good motion. Dropbox, for example, classic, like I can just go and use it by myself because I can see the value by myself. So think carefully about that. Think carefully about like what it takes to actually onboard and find value from your solution, whether it takes like multiple stakeholders, like what are the blockers, and figure out like how much can you design around it and how much is like just like need to like go through that blocker and whether PLG makes sense there.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you for that. And expanding on that a little bit, you mentioned that for companies that maybe did it too early because PLG takes a little bit for that flywheel to get going, to get cranked up. What sort of signals or indicators should companies be looking at to say like, hey, PLG is working well, continue to focus efforts there, or maybe it's not working so well. Maybe you need to either stop or rethink how you approach PLG. Kind of what area should we be looking for as we try to implement PLG?
Yeah, it's very difficult, and it's also
I know most of these questions are like it depends, right? But it's
you're really testing me here. So there is a bit of a chicken and an egg problem. And this might not apply completely to startups. It applies to maybe it applies to like more bigger or medium-sized companies. Oftentimes execs think that it's possible to see the value of PLG very, very quickly. The reality is it's not. Like, and honestly, I think it's at least a multi-year, 2-3 year experiment that you need to run. So the tendency to like see for 6 months and see like nothing working and call it a day is very, very strong. And it's important to resist it and have alignment with at the exec level that, hey, this is like a company transformational like thing we're doing, and we need to give it like time for it to work. So first part is like don't be impatient. The second thing is how do you know whether like things are working, and how do you know like when to actually like abandon ship? So when a classic way to like know when things are working is if you end up having users who you don't necessarily need to talk to in order for them to use the product well. Like if you see a lot of that happening, then it means this particular product and solution you're building for this market can be PLG-fied at scale. But if you're finding yourself talking to a lot of customers who are implementing your product, doing custom implementation, there's no pattern in those like in implementations or like custom things that you're doing, then you gotta like, you gotta think about, okay, is a classic like product-led growth model make sense here, or is it more of a hybrid thing? And there are obviously some conversations you have with customers that you can eventually automate out, and there's some that you cannot. So it's very product dependent. For example, Data IQ. I don't know whether you guys heard about that company, but Data IQ is a machine learning enablement company. They provide tools to help data science workflows like collaboration, etc. From the outside, I'm not like an insider Data IQ. Like from the outside, it appears that Data IQ does a lot of like custom implementation for customers, because the customers they sell to tend to be large enterprises. They have very custom workflows the data science team uses. So every engagement that they do like tends to be like in a very custom. And there's a lot of money to be like made there. And if that is the thing that is working for you, then design your company around that. Like don't try to think about like product-led growth. Does that make sense, Ernesto? Like I don't know, like you have follow-up questions. I don't want to.
Yeah. No, totally makes sense. And like the more standard or the more just kind of like the person that onboards to the product, the more that they can do all that by themselves, the better it's the company or product is suited for PLG. When you start getting to heavier onboarding flows, or this kind of like example with Data IQ, where you need some more kind of fine tuning to the end customer, that's where it becomes a little bit more challenging to implement PLG.
Yeah. And one of the things I would mention is, and this is the reason my company exists, is we are increasingly seeing what we call a hybrid motion. And a hybrid motion is you have your product-led growth motion to get your customers through the door using the product in some narrow use cases. And then you layer your classic sales growth motion on top of that to get the really big deals from those particular customers. So in other words, PLG essentially becomes a new marketing funnel, where in the past you use marketing to get marketing qualified leads based on user interaction on your site. Sometimes you can use PLG to get product qualified leads based on how users are interacting with their product. And then you layer in people, more expensive customizations on the right accounts to grow them. And we saw a lot of that at Mongo. So database products, pretty complex, but you can use it in non-complex ways to get started, to just understand what the value is. So we got a huge funnel of customers through the product-led growth motion. But then it turns out that at certain scale, enterprise scale, you need more customization. You need solutions engineering to help them. And we had a layered enterprise sales motion on top of that. So increasingly, I expect to see more hybrid motions. So it's not just a binary thing that it's not that you're not product-led growth and your only sales are growth. It could be both as well.
Could be a mix of both.
Yeah.
Got it.
And it's different customers you get through both of those funnels.
Got it. I would love to dive a little bit more into your experience at Mongo. I'm sure you had tons of projects or experience to draw from there. I would love to hear about maybe some of the experiments that you ran, that the experiment itself was not successful or helped drive PLG, but that it did uncover some insights that then helped you refine and kind of attack PLG much better.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you a really dumb one and then some, I guess, smart ones. So one of the experiments we ran was, so we had, when you try to sign into Mongo Cloud, you had 3 tiers you could go into. You had your free tier, you had your paid but non-production tier, and you had your paid but production tier. And production tier basically had, if you are building an application and you are trying to run it in production at scale, you want to use the production tier paid. But if you're not there and it's a startup, so you don't have tons of customers, you go to the middle tier. One of the experiments we ran is there was a hypothesis about, are there customers who are signing up for the free tier that they would rather just sign up for the paid tier, but they're signing up for the free tier because the free tier bucket was first, like on the left-hand side of the screen. So we flipped it around. We're like, all right, we're gonna make paid tier the first one, followed by the free tier, and then the paid production tier. And that led to an increase in customers who are signing up for the paid tier. And we're like, oh, that's interesting. So there's probably like a bucket of customers who would have just gone to the paid tier directly, but they would go to the free tier instead first.
This is the first thing they saw.
Yeah, exactly. This is the first thing they saw. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. So like, is this like a magic bullet to increase our revenue by 5%? And we had a large revenue base, so that was like a huge number. Not really. It turned out at the end that when we started to track conversion rates, retention rates, month after month, we saw that the cohort of customers who jumped into the paid tier, when we flipped it to like the left-hand side of the screen, they had like lower retention. So over time, it was actually like bad for like monetization than it like initially appeared, because they did it because it was the first thing that they could do. They didn't actually have like a hired paid tier like an intent. But it could have like easily gone the other way. For some products, it could have been that, that product, it made sense, but for us, it did not make sense. So that's an example of, assumptions you have to challenge with, real experiments and real data.
Yeah, and got to look at several of the signals, right? Because like you said, if
Exactly.
you just focus on the sign up, then okay, this looks great. But then when you looked at the single retention, it's like, oh, actually not as great. So have to keep a very holistic look and look about like both near term and short term, medium term, long term kind of effects of those strategies, right?
Yeah, exactly. The other like very interesting experiment, which is broadly applicable, is playing with the different versions of the free tier. So you could have a free tier, for example, like we had a free tier which capped where you can only store up to 500 megabytes of data in a virtual MongoDB instance. We looked into like, oh, what if we give them a gigabyte? What if we change how much CPU compute capability that we provided them? And it turns out that it doesn't actually make any difference. The conversion rate still stayed the same, retention still stayed the same, monetization still stayed the same. So that wasn't like the thing that people actually cared too much about. But what we did instead was we're like, okay, we ran another experiment where we had certain features that were only available in the paid tier, but not the free tier. We had this hypothesis that, okay, we were assuming that people would jump into paid tier for those features, but I don't think that's what people are jumping into features for other reasons. We're going to give those features in the free tier and see whether that improves conversion rate. And that did massively. So because people were understanding the value of the product better because they had those paid features in the free tier. Now, an obvious question here might be, does that hurt your long-term monetization potential? It depends on the company, but for the case of MongoDB, at least, we make money based on how many requests people make to MongoDB. In other words, like how much are they using the database?
Yeah.
Queries, exactly, queries. So we got people to use more queries if we gave away those features from paid to free than than without it. So those are some of the experiments, or some of the questions ask yourself as you're building out your PLG product.
Got it. And then kind of along with this and some of the points you made earlier, how did you think about the limits or the usage that you gave to your customers, right? So you say the most standard that you see out there is 14 or 30-day free trial, right? But like you said, for some other products where it's more usage-based, kind of like you said, for queries and stuff, how do you how should one think about what should I cap that at, or how should I basically set it up so that I know that my customer was able to understand the product, get enough of the value proposition, but then hit them right at the point where okay, now you've used it, you're familiar with it, let's start to get you paying, because if not, they could be on the free one for a good amount of time, right? So
yeah, that's a good question. It's the answer I guess is very tightly coupled with what the perceived customer value is for your product and how you're pricing it. And in an ideal world, the way you're pricing it should align with the perceived customer value. So let's look at like in the two use cases. Let's look at classic infrastructure, developer infrastructure companies, databases, Lambda, Firebase, AWS, like Lambda, etc. The measure of value for the customer there is how many requests they are running, like how often they're using the database, etc. So usage-based in some form or fashion. For an e-commerce marketplace, it's also usage-based, really. Like, how much are you buying is like the measure of value, correct? In those cases, the metric of success is how often customers use the product. And if you're pricing like, based on that, the answer is like, easy on how you should think about your free tier. It's probably some limit to how much that particular metric can be used by users. So how many queries you can run, how much data you can put in the database, how many minutes of calling that you can have in the free tier, like Zoom has 45 minutes, for example. So you basically like play with those like thresholds with experiments, but that metric and that metric is the thing that you should be like putting your free on, and make everything else unlimited, so people can use it for however long they want, as long as they don't like go over like this many minutes or this many like requests. But then like let's look at a product which is more on the productivity side. So Asana's charges based on seats, but not only seats. Like they charge based on seats, but they also charge based on what type of features you're using. So for example, in Asana, if you're doing complicated automation on your project board, you have to jump into the business plan. So those features are gated behind the business plan, and other features are not. So and also like Asana has a hybrid model in a way, because they charge based on seats as well. So they give away 5 seats for free, and then if you want to like add more seats, you have to like jump into like the paid tier. But then the amount of dollars you pay per seat jumps again when you go to like the business tier, because some features are like better for like in the business versus not. So you gotta like think about again like what is the perceived, how are people perceiving like value, how are you charging, and then based on that come up with what should be free. And the three levers that you have are time-based, feature, and usage-based. So those are like the 3 levers that you have to play with.
Right. And now diving in a little deeper, we came across, because I saw your awesome post on LinkedIn regarding like more of the pricing, or how to think about like, is PLG worth it for me? Because like in the case in the Asana, the example you used, they're still using, people trying your products are still using resources, right? That still costs you. So any guidance there on like how to think about like how much should I dedicate towards like this free model, or what are some like good conversion rates from like that free to the paid, like any?
So let's start with the conversion rates. The average, the median that I'm seeing is 5%. So 5% of free tier users end up converting into paid tier users. Actually, let's get back. It's on the median. I think it's like the best performing companies have like 5%. That's still much better than other like channels. So that's like the general like number I'm seeing. Now, obviously, it will vary widely depending on the product and the industry and whatnot. So one of the things you should be like thinking about is, I have this theory that 5 years back, when you raise money from VCs, a lot of the money would go into marketing, basically go into the pockets of Facebook and all the ad companies, Facebook and Google. A lot of it would still go to Facebook and Google, but a substantial chunk of it would go to the cloud providers. Because you're buying resources to provide a free tier experience for your customers. Now, the good thing is, the cloud providers are significantly cheaper, and you have a lot of like things you can do to lower the cost of like your free tier customers. Some of the technical things you can do could be around using virtual servers or like doing multi-tenancy, etc. Like at MongoDB, we invested quite a lot of money in figuring out how to have a very scalable, like in a free tier experience. Other things that I've seen people do is they go into deals with the cloud providers saying, hey, I will have this free tier and I need X number of resources from you to do that. So there are techniques people use around that. From some of the best performing companies that I've seen do PLG really well. I was doing an analysis the other day on Cloudflare, and let me see if I can pull up the stats quickly. But it turns out, let's see, I don't have those numbers in front of me. But
you can share it to me later, and then I'll
share
it
later. Yeah. The amount of money that they were spending servicing each free tier customer, they were making 100x on top of that from their paid tier customers. So they're a masterclass of figuring that out. And that was the same case for MongoDB. We spend a tiny amount of infrastructure dollars on servicing our free tier customers, but our average revenue per customer was 100x, probably higher than that. So it really worked out well for us. These numbers, in honesty, are very, very hard to get because no one actually shares all these details in public stock filing. But I'll share the Cloudflare analysis with people here shortly afterwards once I dig it up.
Sweet, thank you. And so you've mentioned Cloudflare. Are there other companies that you look for as kind of thought leaders or as good examples of them excelling at PLG, so that we can track them and start looking for inspiration from them? And then on top of that, any individuals or any resources, books, I don't know, other, apart from yourself, obviously, because everybody should definitely follow Rez and Pace. Clearly, he's an expert at this, but other people that you look to as thought leaders in the space as well, companies.
Yeah. So from a thought leader perspective, there's a bunch of VCs who do publish really good content. I like OpenView a lot. So Kyle Pollard from OpenView publishes a ton of content around product-led growth, especially for B2B companies, which might be very relevant for a lot of people here. There is a couple of newsletter, I think Lenny something, he may be affiliated with YC in some capacity. He has a very good newsletter on just general product management, increasing on product-led growth. Bessemer is beginning to publish really good content, so I'll follow them as well. A bunch of VCs are beginning to have these operator personas, focused on product-led growth or hybrid product-led growth and sales-led growth. One of my friends, he works at Kleiner Perkins. His name is Liam Mulcahy. He's an operator there. He publishes really good hybrid content. And I can obviously share the written down version later on. In terms of companies to aspire, my favorite. So I come from the developer infrastructure world, obviously, so I really gravitate towards companies like that. But like I mentioned, I really like Cloudflare. I think they're kicked ass in execution. Datadog is another classic example. Datadog came into a very crowded observability market. There was 50 or 100 different vendors selling monitoring tools. But Datadog is one of the first who did product-led growth in that industry and just absolutely crushed it by easy user onboarding. And there's a lot to learn from the Datadog experience because they took a very complicated product and made it very easy to use. So I suggest people actually try out the Datadog onboarding, which I really, really like, and see how easy they made using a monitoring tool. From the non-developer developer tooling world, the classic examples are Slack, Dropbox, etc. Asana is also another a good one. And one of the key things to look out for, and I actually mentioned this in the past, is if one of the core components of product-led growth is how do you get the internal flywheel going? Internal flywheel means how do you get the people who signed up for the product to invite other people? And there are some products which are very good for that, some products are not. But one of the things which Slack did really well is it was very easy to like add other people in the company to Slack, and that got viral growth. Same with Dropbox. Like, when you share your Dropbox link with your friends, like they can sign up for like Dropbox. There are some products which are like very hard to do that for. And we couldn't really figure that out at Mongo because, for a database product, you kind of tend to use it by yourself. Yeah. But there were lots of experiments we were running to try to figure that out.
Awesome. Before we hop into Q&A here, any other kind of advice, guidance, thoughts on PLG that we haven't touched on so far?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing I would say is, so good product management is very, 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 very important in successfully scaling PLG out. And good product management, a lot of it means talking to your customers. So even if you have a PLG motion and it's successful, it is very, very important to keep on talking to your customers. This might be a very, very obvious advice, so apologies for that. But one of the things that we did really well at Mongo as well is, me and my old boss at Mongo, we used to have these scripts running where we looked at customers who churned in a particular week, and we would personally reach out to, as many customers as we could. And we were doing this at massive scale. It was like a tens of $billion business, and we're still doing it. And we learned so much just by doing things like that you cannot just replicate with even looking at data. So understanding qualitatively what the users are doing is just as important for PLG as it's for, even more important for PLG in some cases as it's for traditional non-PLG products.
Awesome. Well, before we hop into the Q&A here real quick, Rez, we'd love to hear, how can the YC community leverage Pace to help them in their efforts for PLG?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for asking that question. So we're a very early stage company. So we just came out of stealth a few weeks back.
Nice, congrats.
Thank you. We don't solve the problem that companies face when they first start PLG, but we solve the problem once they start to get the hockey stick growth in PLG. And the problem we solve is we help those companies figure out what is the best way to layer in people, because those companies are growing very quickly. They have a lot of free users, for example. They just don't have enough people to talk to all the free users. And hence they might miss out on a monetization opportunity where a sales-led approach might make sense. So for those companies, we basically connect to where their data is sitting, which is a data warehouse. And then we help create signals on when a human being should be engaging with a customer in their product-led growth funnel. And then we pass on those signals to different tools you may be using for your everyday workflow, like Slack or a CRM. So essentially, we're trying to be the link between your data warehouse where your product data is sitting, and which we can use to come up with signals on when you should be engaging with your customers, and your CRM where your reps or even your product people are doing their day-to-day job. So we're in private beta. There's a sign up on the website, paceapp.com. Yeah, feel free to sign up, and if you mention, or if you shoot me an email and say that you're part of this chat or part of the YC community, I'd love to chat with you. And even if it's not a commercial opportunity, it's still awesome just learn from people like you guys.
Sweet. Yeah, and I'll put that up right now so everyone can see what we're talking about. One sec. Here we go. Is it share my screen? Okay, there we go. Great. Well, Rez, thank you so much. To the audience, we're going to open it up now for Q&A. So feel free to drop your questions, or I believe we can also give you the ability to ask Rez questions directly. Don't be shy, y'all.
I can start with a question for both of y'all. Thank you, Rez. You're clearly very knowledgeable on this topic, but for people who are new to this topic, what would be some resources that you would recommend for learning about PLG, and any other people to follow, or any books you recommend, things like that?
Yeah, so one of the things that I really like, I'm just going to drop it in the chat, is like OpenView has a ton of really good content, and they're very operations focused, which is what I like. I mean, there's a ton of people just writing content, which can be very theoretical, but they tend to be like, very practical. So that's one. There is a couple of like other individuals who write newsletters, which are very good. I can like share that with you guys offline.
Sweet.
I'm kind of curious to hear more about these participants. We have an Emily Simmons online. I'm kind of curious what Emily does as well. Emily, can you hear us in the chat? Or if you can hear us, holler in the chat, and I can give you can allow you to talk. Or yes, Emily, do you mind if I allow you to talk? You can mute yourself if you want, but I'm going to press the button now. Talking permitted. Yeah, we can hear you. What's up? Hi. Who are you? Introduce yourself.
Thanks for inviting me to introduce myself. I am part of Nest Genomics. We recently graduated from YC. We are a digital health company focused on integrating genomics into primary care. And we're early on, but this is really interesting for us. We've been playing with the idea of whether we can offer some of our tools to certain providers or possibly even patients in kind of a product-led growth fashion. It would definitely be like more of the hybrid model that you were talking about, Rez, I think, where our big accounts, like the big revenue is from contracting with major health systems kind of at their C-suite level. But, it's interesting to think about trying to get some more like ground roots use of the product and how we could do that. It's not necessarily, at least in the genomic space, kind of a giant user market with a long tail. So that stuck out to me as like something to think about. But
yeah, no, that I mean, healthcare is a particularly tricky industry to do PLG because of just so many regulations and data privacy issues, right? So I mean, I can connect you with a friend of mine if you're interested. He works at a company called Health Here. They're basically trying to create a much more like a more user-friendly patient onboarding experience for doctors. Like instead of filling up like in a forms, you go to a doctor's office, you have this nice iPad that you can like fill up. And he has been he runs sales there, and he has been experimenting with like PLG, and I'm guessing he ran into very similar questions that you are running into. And some of the ideas like we talked about was, hey, is there like who is the person who implement or is the admin user of these tools? It tends to be front desk receptionist in these companies. So like, what is there a PLG experience like for them that makes sense? So he could be like an interesting person for you to like talk to if you're that
cool. Would be wonderful. Yeah, I would love that. Thank you so much.
Cool. And my email is rez@paysap.com. So just shoot me an email.
Okay. Well, yeah.
The other thing, Emily, you can think about is this is also sort of a little bit like controversial. Like sometimes you don't have to PLG the entire product. You can PLG parts of it.
Right.
So is there an experience where some end user of your product can come in and get some value, which might not be the whole product, and that's okay because you just get them to understand what the company does quickly. And one example of this is Amplitude, which is a product analytics tool. It is not really a PLG product because there's a lot of steps needed to implement Amplitude in your organization. But they do have this experience where you can sign into Amplitude and get access to a sandbox with dummy data and play around with it to understand what Amplitude does. So maybe like there is an experience that you can think of which does that without the expensive integrations and whatnot.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought.
Yeah, and I think
go ahead. Sorry,
something very interesting there, Rez, is that like if your product serves multiple customers within the same company or different personas, like it's also quite important or critical to find like who you should target for that PLG kind of like strategy, right? Because there could be, yeah, I just wanted to highlight that because it really came out. We have another question here. How much should an early stage startup balance handling customer onboarding? Should we lean more towards assisting onboarding in person or focus on building out documentation and helping it be more self-serve?
Yeah, I would say like, for your first maybe 50 customers, so obviously have documentations. Like everyone, it's like table stakes. Everyone expects like some documentation, and do the best job you can to make sure the documentations are good. But for your first 50 customers, I would say like it's, you probably doing a lot of like assisted like an onboarding in person. And you should. I mean, I'm doing the same thing for my company, where for the first maybe 25 customers, we are just all over them. Like we have Slack channels with them. We are just like talking with them if you can, like pretty much every day to an annoying level, because you'll just like learn about what are the blockers for onboarding by having those conversations.
I wanted to note that I gave everyone permission to talk. So whoever asked that question, if you want to add anything or introduce yourself, you're welcome to do so. We have Vasco Bautista online, as well as participants. Sam as well. Oh, Sam, was that you who asked that question?
Yeah, I have a new question.
Go for it.
Oh, cool. So yeah, we're a startup looking to offer marketing automation, some of the marketing tools for e-commerce sellers. It's a massive industry with a lot of kind of SMB focused for us. But my question is, in a product-led growth mode, how do you it's a very busy market, a lot of noises, a lot of kind of automation talks, a lot of AI jargon thrown around. How do you stand out and find pockets of opportunities to even kick off the product-led growth flywheels? I guess that question is for both of you guys, just because I know Mayan's focus on Amazon as well. It's a lot of noises there, and some other developer focused tools as well. So,
Ernesto, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so for Mayan, how we try to stand out is by kind of, to Rez's point, focusing on the customer experience and the onboarding. So there's other players in the space that also leverage machine learning and automations. And even if you look at their website, they're very much promoting that, or it's very much technology focused. And for us, we say like, look, you get the machine learning technology and all that, but you also like have humans at your side at the end of the day, or you have, it's kind of like human-led machine learning technology. So that's a way that we try to stand out. And now to a point that Rez made earlier, right now we are not leveraging PLG at Mayan. We were very much kind of like manually onboarding customers and really sitting with them and getting to understand, kind of proving that product market fit. And now is when we're really looking to like, okay, we've also identified, because in that learning journey, we transitioned from one pricing model to the next. And I think if we would have tried to do the PLG with the original pricing model, we would have seen slower adoption, because that was a challenge that we were only able to, or rather, that was a roadblock or a finding that we were only able to surface by being so kind of manual at first. And now that we've refined our pricing model, we see that that's working a lot better. That's also going to hopefully open up the doors to have more better approach to PLG. And then Rez, I'll let you add to color to that from your perspectives.
Yeah, it's super challenging, obviously. I think in the early stages, it's about just focusing on a particular customer persona that you feel is underserved, and figuring out what acquisition channels make sense to talk to that particular persona. And I'll give you a real example. A friend of mine runs an ETL company, and it's a very crowded market. So ETL companies are companies which take data from a SaaS app and puts them in the data warehouse. Very, very like in a crowded market. The niche that he has figured out for himself is the long tail of SaaS applications that the large ETL vendors do not do. And he is heavily focused on serving that particular like market. So then the next question is, where are these users, and how do I find users who have an integration need, which is like in a more long tail in nature? And he's figured out that the channel here isn't like blasting like ads. It's the data consultants who oftentimes these companies work with to implement ETL solutions or implement like the data infrastructure. So what he has done is he has gone on and made a list of like a couple of hundred data consultants, and is trying to like partner with like each one of them. So so he could get his product out through them. And the content that he oftentimes like writes is around like the how to empower these like data consultants. So basically, the example here is he's figured out a niche. He's figured out like where these customers usually like hang out and talk about this problem, and he's like going after like that particular like market in the beginning. It is like very, very risky to just start too like broad, especially in early stages, and you'll oftentimes kill the company if you do that.
Yeah, and I want to add something, I guess. I don't know if it will fall into PLG or not, but something that we've been leveraging a lot is, in a way, kind of like paid PLG, where we let our customers test out our optimization product with one of their 10 products that they have in their catalog, or for a month or two. And then when they see the value, see that we're actually helping them grow their business, that's when they hand over the rest of the catalog. So that's been a way that we, and I guess, somehow leverage PLG.
Got it. Just kind of a search engine conversions and free trials, then kick off the wheel.
Paid trials. So, but that's where the PLG will come. We're now looking to open up a little bit more of that free side.
Got it.
And then Sam, do you guys do any content marketing type things?
Very early on, we haven't started on that yet. So potentially blog posts later on, YouTube channels, etc.
Yeah, I mean, this might apply more to the developer infrastructure world more, but very, very tailored content, tailored technical content is oftentimes the way that lots of dev tooling companies start out with. And even like Mongo, we did a lot of that in the early days of like in the Mongo, where we wrote content about how to use Mongo with React, shit like that.
Got it. Yeah, we just thought there's so many influencers, gurus out there on marketing. It's kind of hard to start out fresh.
Have
Yeah,
faith.
that's where focus comes in. If you have a niche which you feel is underserved, you like talk about content there. Sorry, Julia.
No, I was just saying, believe in yourself, Sam. You can do it. We have the same challenge. We're facing some big competitors. Sorry, I'm the marketing person, and we face some big competitors, but we've actually been able, it takes about 6 months really, at least, to see results. So if you don't see results in the first 3 months, don't get discouraged with content marketing.
Thank you.
We also have 2 additional people online. Also, if you even if you don't have a question, feel free to, unmute yourself, introduce yourself. We have Donaji as well as Vasco as well. If you want to say hi and tell us more about what you're working on and what you think about PLG, feel free to do so.
Hey, so my name is Vasco. I'll be real quick because I gotta hop into another call right after this. But actually, Donaji and I both work at the same place. We're at Paperspace. We do have a PLG model that we run with. It's sort of a hybrid model because we do some. I'm sorry, I'm on the customer success team, so I'm the guy that does the onboarding pretty much with new clients. But yeah, like I was saying, we run a hybrid model where we do some sales-driven work with clients, but also we do have that PLG in place. And the cool thing I think about that is that, I mean, when it comes to certain companies, they prefer to have the onboarding process and get that help from us. But then we also have that self-service, and we also have that self-service where it's more tied to PLG, as the user or customer would just log on and get self-onboarded and kind of run with it like that, right? But it was really good hearing you guys talk about the importance of PLG, because I do believe that it's a much less friction type of engagement with companies and larger companies. So really hoping to join another webinar with you guys to see how that keeps on growing and yeah. But nice to meet you both, Rez.
Pleasure to meet you, Vasco.
All right, guys.
Bye-bye. Well, any other questions from the audience or any parting thoughts? Rez, I know we're coming here close to the top of the hour and want to be respectful of everyone's time.
No, like in a particular parting thoughts, just that, yeah, I'm happy to like talk more offline. If you guys like have questions or just want to brainstorm as you're like thinking through PLG, just happy to like spend some time with you. Believe it or not, it's my passion, which sounds really corny.
Hey, there's a reason why you're doing PACE, right?
Yeah. It does like fundamentally transform like lots of like stodgy old companies into something more like human centric, which is really cool.
Nice. Yeah, it's definitely a more human focused approach and
Yeah,
like
exactly.
value based, right?
Yeah, it's more value based than yeah, what the hell enterprise software was before.
Great. Well, everyone, thank you so much for stopping by. Hope this was useful. It was extremely useful for myself, Rez. Thank you for dropping so much knowledge on us. Thank you for taking time from your day to share your expertise, and yeah, looking forward to staying in touch and to do another one of these in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.
Bye, everyone.